Hi, I'm Ronna Francis here at KVEC with Ripple Effects and Project Prevent. And we've got Bessie Bowling over here. I'm trying to get her over here. She won't come over here. And then Miss Carpenter back here, Bernadette Carpenter. We've got Executive Assistant, Executive Director, Bessie. What do you do? Everything. I'm an instructional leader. You're an instructional lead or something like that.
Heidi, how are you?
Okay, Stephanie Kidd, I'm the math consultant.
And I'm Vonda Adams. I'm also a math consultant here at KVEC.
Oh, wait, maybe I found one.
Hey everybody, I'm Jennifer Carroll. I'm here at KVEC as well.
I see we have Whitney. Whitney, or you or Autumn. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. You want to introduce yourself, Autumn, please?
Yes. I'm Autumn Newsom. I'm the Letcher County hearing impaired teacher. I also teach the LBD students as well. I apologize for being late. I realized what the problem was. My desk computer did not have a webcam, so I whipped out my laptop.
Okay.
Figured it out.
Okay. Good. I'm glad you got it figured out. It takes just a little bit to get used to the Zoom meeting, so it'll be kind of a process.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Hi, Carol. Hi, Carol.
Andrew's gonna mute me.
Okay. And Whitney, can you hear us?
Whitney introduced herself in the chat box.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you, Whitney. And then we have Diane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
No.
That's what I'm doing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Diane Birchfield. I'm just kind of eavesdropping. I'm here in Pike County and just kind of seeing what you all are discussing today.
Okay. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
So the first part of our agenda today, we're going to talk about eligibility, and we were just talking about how we can support teachers with determining eligibility, and talk about some resources that are available, and just answer any questions that you may have about eligibility. And then we're going to talk about using data to make decisions about eligibility, but then also using data to help support our writing a present level of educational performance in the IEP. So I wanted to share with you first a resource, and then we can just have some discussion about it. But on my screen, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this particular page is the Kentucky Department of Education. If you go to KDE's website, you can go up in the search bar and just type in eligibility. And if you have questions about a particular eligibility, all of the forms that you would need that would help you answer questions about eligibility, it can be found here. So you just type in the search bar the eligibility, and it'll bring you to this page. And this is a good place to start if you have questions about eligibility. You can see that we talk about, child find evaluations and reevaluations, and then there's the link for eligibility. And just, so I wanted to share just that link with you, but really what I wanted you to see is over here in the right-hand column. I'm not sure why that, right here, over here in this right-hand column, and I don't know if everybody can see that because my screen, okay, but over here on the right-hand column are the access to forms. And so if you wanted to look more closely at eligibility and you had questions about eligibility, you could click on any one of these forms. Does anyone have one that they would like for me to select in particular? Autumn, you want to look at a particular one?
Let's do the monitoring documents. Is that one of them, or?
Let's see, you can look at the monitoring document. Let me see where you're at. I'm not sure if I see that.
My page is, it looks like the eligibility determination page is the one. Is that what I'm supposed to be seeing?
Okay, does it look like the one on my screen?
It's on the left-hand side of the page.
Yeah, on the right-hand side.
To the right-hand.
Yeah, I'm looking on right. Yes, on the right-hand side. I see where you're. My pictures are over there. On the right-hand side, you'll see the list of forms. You see that, Autumn? And so there's.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we're covering it. That's what it is.
Yeah. And so yeah, it was covered. Yes, that's what happened to mine. But on this particular form, on this side where the forms are at, you can see that all of the disability categories. That's where you can access the eligibility forms. So if you were had a question about eligibility for a student, so if you're new to special education or have only been in special education a short period of time, sometimes it's good to just be able to have access to the eligibility forms. And so I like to send folks to this, the department's, the link, and so you can access those. So if there's a particular one that you wanted to look at, we could just take a look at them. So if we wanted to look at the eligibility form for, maybe let's look at DePaul or Brona. Is there either one of those?
Y'all look at SLD. It's a little different than all the others, and it requires signatures.
Okay.
It's a little more involved.
Okay. So if we're thinking about looking at what eligibility is for a specific learning disability, so that should be, does everyone see that on the screen now that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to move this over again. So this is just that eligibility form. So if you have some questions or maybe you're not real clear on it, you can come and take a look at this form. And this is really what you find in Infinite Campus when you start working on eligibility. But this kind of gives you some guidance. And so you look at this form and you make a determination if a student does present with a specific learning disability, and how you can use the data that you have from your reports to make a decision about eligibility. Dean Paul, is there anything you want me to talk about specifically here?
Yes, the one thing to note would be that in order for the child to be found eligible, all the boxes would be marked yes.
Good.
Okay, so when you're looking at down that left-hand side of that page, you're going to have to meet all that criteria that's listed there. The other good thing about SLD and what the KDE provides for us is an additional guidance document that goes with SLD alone. And so you have that at your fingertips as well at the KDE website. You can pull that up and you can read all you want to read about things like exclusionary items such as attendance, or whether the child's had the proper instruction in reading, or whether they've had the proper instruction in math, and those types of things. And then obviously you would get into looking at, if you look at number 2 there, the eligibility itself. Are you using method A, which most of our regional districts use method A, where they go by the discrepancy model. There's a set of tables, and you have to take the IQ test, or the score from the IQ, and you compare that to your achievement scores in reading, math, and written expression. And then you would say, okay, is there a discrepancy, or does the child meet the discrepancy in that area? So that's how you would determine that. And then you would check which one they meet it in. Is it basic reading skills there for number 3, or is it reading comprehension? You see the area where you can meet the discrepancy on item number 3. If you just want to go right on down there, we can just cover it. And then it says the deficit and achievement are not primarily a result of any of these things: visual, hearing, and motor impairment. Those are your exclusionary clauses for SLD. And so if there's cultural factors involved, if the child has limited English proficiency, you would want to be cautious about finding them eligible for SLD. If they have an emotional behavioral disability, they certainly that would be an exclusionary clause. A mental disability, those types of things. So that is very well explained in the guidance document, in the SLD guidance document as well. So if you want to read more about that, it's certainly a great resource for all of us as we try to get these eligibility determinations correct.
And Denny, Paul, on method A and method B, if the district you can do either or.
You can. It's not suggested as a best practice, Bronna. I think you and I have had that discussion at many junctures along while we've been working together as co-directors, and then also since I've been at KVEC. Response to intervention is another avenue to lead to eligibility in specific learning disability. However, the policies and procedures handbook in your district should have chosen a way for you to do that. And then some districts left it as either or. So you could choose to do either one. Like I know, like in Pikeville Independent where I was, we just chose a method and stuck with the severe discrepancy because what we got into, and now that a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then, but what we've gotten into is not a real good, clear picture of what response to intervention data looks like, because everybody's doing a lot of different things. So at the time that we made that decision, we felt like it was a stronger stance for eligibility legally because response to intervention had not been well developed in our district at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But it is certainly another way to do it. And if you have good, hard RTI data, the thing about it is the child making progress or not? And you have to define what sufficient progress looks like. And that's really subjective. And so in our talks with Teresa Combs, who is the guru behind the legal aspects of all this eligibility, and she's been through many court cases, she gave us guidance to kind of stay with the discrepancy model all those years ago. Now, people are doing a better job with RTI now. So it's certainly an avenue that we can look at. And that would be something you would need individually to check with your director at each of your districts to see what policy and procedure you're following in regards to that.
Okay, now before students eligible, also they have to have gone through the RTI anyway.
That's right.
True.
That's right.
It would be method A or method B.
Yes, right.
And doesn't that have to be decided at the consent meeting prior to any testing?
It does. It is a way to, most of the time directors will have someone keeping the gate, so to speak, with referrals, and they'll review referrals to see that the RTI is done. But RTI is supposed to be being done anyway, and so what we're talking about is RTI for all kids. But then are we using RTI as a method to find the child eligible? There's a distinct difference. And so you have to have some real hard data there to say that the child is not making sufficient progress in RTI to go ahead and definitively say they have a specific learning disability. And it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is very possible to do that if the RTI is developed well enough.
Yeah. And they have to use science research-based assessments when they do the RTI interventions.
That's exactly right.
Right. That's a very good point.
Well, with RTI, all kids are at the universal do the universal screeners with tier 1, but when you get to tier 3, that's when it's coming close to whether that would be enough to make them eligible for.
I agree with you, Bron. I really do. I just was never comfortable enough with the fidelity of the RTI program that I was involved with to definitively say this child. Right. Can you show me the data? Right. And so the discrepancy model is kind of old school. Yeah. And I just as a personal preference, I would rather use the discrepancy model because I think it's kind of clear cut and it's the safer legal passage. However, we don't want to leave any kids out. So if we were looking at that and we didn't have the discrepancy that we needed, but the child was close, we could retest, or we could look at they've not responded to the intervention that we provided, and if we have the hard data, then we could go ahead and make a call as an ARC, and I think that would be perfectly okay. But that would be an ARC decision.
Right.
I hope I didn't confuse you guys on that. That's a toughie to start off with. It really is. But if you go on number 5, evaluation information confirms there's an adverse effect on educational performance. When you're found eligible in Kentucky, you not only have to have a discrepancy, a diagnosed disability, but you also have to have an adverse effect on your educational performance. And certainly, if you've got a 22-point discrepancy between your reading achievement and your IQ score, you're going to have an adverse effect. And it's going to impact how you're performing on grade level. And that's what you look at when you're looking at adverse effect. You just say, hey, here's what 3rd grade reading should look like. And this is where this child is. Now we've got a gap, and we've got to build a bridge between the gap and where the performance is grade level. So that's something to look at. And then 6, evaluation information confirms lack of instruction in reading. That has to do with attendance. And that would be something that you would need to review closely with your director. When a child misses 20-some days of school, it can safely be said that maybe they haven't had the proper instruction in reading and math. And if that's the case, an eligibility decision may not be the thing to go for until that child does have the proper core instruction. So that's an exclusionary rule. And that's very well defined as well in the SLD guidance document. And then you move right on through any relevant behavior that you've noted in the behavioral observations. You would document there, and any kind of educationally relevant medical findings, and you go right on down. And then you start to, if you're doing the RTI method B, you would document your instructional strategies that you implemented here. And then there's a place there, the students' parents have been notified of the policies regarding those particular items, and describe how the information was provided to the parent. If you go to the record review document where we're reviewing files, there's a question on there about RTI, and it says how there's criteria. The RTI should be research-based. It should be provided at reasonable intervals. We should leave enough time and have enough data points to definitively say the child's had an opportunity to respond to the intervention. And then it also asks, have we provided the information to the parents at the proper amount of time? So that's what number 10 is about right there. This is one of the more difficult eligibility pages. That's why I thought it was a good place to start. We have a new participant.
He's on TV. That's Grant. That's my middle boy. Say hi, Grant. I got another one in here. I just got a whole room full of kids.
Oh, yeah.
Got one at home too.
That time of day, isn't it?
Yep.
So then you go on the next page and you're looking at the triangulation of data. So you're going to pull in all your supporting documentation. You're going to have all your academic scores. You're going to have your IQ scores. You're going to have your state and district-wide testing. You're going to have your classroom assessments, and all that you would pull together, your behavioral observations, your adaptive behavior score. All of those pieces would go together, and then the ARC would discuss all that and say, yes, we feel like we've triangulated the data, and there is this child truly has a disability. This child truly has an adverse effect, and it's in need of specially designed instruction. And that's the 3 prongs for eligibility in the state of Kentucky. So you got to have a diagnosed disability, you have to have a need for specially designed instruction, and you have to be able to show that there's an adverse effect from the disability on the particular skills that are going to make that child perform at grade level. So that's the kind of things that you would go there for supporting documentation. And then you would check one of those boxes. The student meets the eligibility criteria, and you can see it talks about adverse effect and is eligible for special design instruction related services. Or they do not meet, or the student has a specific learning disability that does not have an adverse impact on his educational performance. So there are several things that you can check there, but most of the time, if they have a discrepancy and there's an adverse effect, and we are able to show it and they need special design instruction, we check the top box. Did I leave anything out, Bronna, on that? Anything you can think of about triangulation of data that I may have not talked about?
I'll get them in the morning. It's fine. I'll get them in the morning.
Yeah, I'll upload them in Simulate.
Okay, that'd be fine.
I don't think Bronna heard me.
Okay. I did want, so that was a good point. Daniel.
I'm sorry. You're okay. That sounds good.
No, I was just asking, was there anything else you could think of in triangulation of data that we may have left out in our discussion there?
No, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you did a good job with that, Denny Paul, because we talk about triangulating data, but do we talk about what are all those multiple sources of data? So we just want to make sure we don't just include the psychological report and the achievement scores, but we also consider classroom performance and all pieces of data, behavioral observations.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Dion.
I think that's a good point, yeah, to talk about that triangulating data, because we have lots of data, but we have to think about what data is the most relevant when we're considering that disability category. And we think about what we might have if it's a student in reading, if it's a reading comprehension or written expression, you know, that we have data to support decisions that we make.
And one of those things that that we see lots, Brenda and I, when we're reviewing files, is that we forget to include this document. Somehow, some way, people forget to include it. So it's a very important piece that this needs to be in the due process file with every eligibility decision. This document needs to be there. Right. So, you know, as new teachers, we certainly need to be mindful of that and make sure that that's a piece that we include every time we make an eligibility decision.
Right. And on this page that's on our screen, that supporting documentation, you want to make sure that the data is there, and then you discuss each of those pieces of data, because before, you know, sometimes you might not have all the data in there, you may not have all the pieces of information, so you just want to make sure that you have include that there in your evidence.
And you know, we talk a lot about in our trainings not copying and pasting from the standards into the IEP goals and things of that nature. This is certainly a document where I could see that you might access the psychological and you may be able to pull a piece in from there. And I think it's okay to do that. You know, you just don't want to copy and paste on your IEPs. But here is a place where I think teachers can use a little shortcut. The other thing is that we haven't talked about as far as eligibility is concerned. There is a timeline once the consent is gained and the consent form is filled out and you plan your evaluation and you get that parent's permission. You have 60 school days in which to finish this and get the IEP in place.
And,
so
and you count the day. I'm sorry, Denny Paul.
Go ahead.
You count the day that they signed it. That is counted also, not the next day.
Right.
I mean, because that's sometimes can be sticky if you.
Yeah.
If you're close.
That it's the day after they sign. They've got 60 days from then, but they have to count the day that they sign the consent.
Right.
So just talking a little bit, we're talking about if we're talking about the discrepancy model in the tables that we use, is that, Dean Paul, let's go back and Bronna talk about right here in the supporting documentation. So we just make it real clear on there. So if you're talking about that eligibility, that's where you're talking about, Denny Paul, to add that information about the psychological report and the academic.
The academic piece.
On there, can you not talk about just the RTI, even though you didn't use RTI for the
for eligibility purpose.
Right. Would you not talk about the RTI data there too?
You could, but
I think it would be. You think that would that be supporting documentation?
Yes,
Also,
it would. It would. It perfectly good. That's a good point, Stephanie. Perfectly good place to put that. But you just pull in those triangulated pieces, the behavioral observations, the adaptive behavior, all the information that would be pertinent to what's causing this child not to be on grade level or on the range, that would be commensurate with other peers.
And when you look at your integrated report, when your psychologist gets finished with it, it has a lot of the triangulation on there. It has all those pieces pulled in.
That's a good point. And they might put that there for the supporting documentation, right, Brona?
That's what I was saying too. That it would be perfect. I would think it would be good to look at those pieces of information. Because lots of times they'll just rehash the behavior observation and put it right in the report. So you've got it right at your fingertips, and there's nothing wrong with getting that into this report by copying and pasting it over there. And certainly RTI would be one that you could look at that, look at the analysis of that, and then put that in there as well.
I'm thinking of a student who may have had reading recovery or math recovery, and they usually do a really great job of doing an analysis of where that student is, and I think that would be perfect for this report.
It would be perfect.
I think one of the things I think that's a great point too, and I think one of the things that we need to be thinking about as we're synthesizing this data in our minds, that we are thinking about the particular discrete skills that we're going to work on with this kid, and where do we find the baseline for that, and can we get that in the present level soon enough that we can write good measurable annual goals? Because if we get off on the wrong foot early, it's really hard to recover that and get that cycle started the way it needs to be started, because one IEP leads to another and it never ends. It's a process. It continues. So it's very, very important that as I review files today and I'm looking at them, I'm seeing that with a lot of these initial referrals, they're failing to identify in the present level what the baseline is. And so you've got to be able to identify what the baseline is in order to write good annual goals and be able to progress monitor them appropriately. There's the signature page I was talking about. Everybody has to sign. This is the only form, Autumn, that everybody has to sign it as well on the ARC. It's an additional, like the conference summary, but then you have to have them. And sometimes it gets a little confusing on agree and disagree. What you're agreeing to there is that the child is eligible.
Right. And don't you have to have an additional behavior observation too, or am I remembering that wrong?
Two observations. Yeah.
Okay, I knew there were two, but I was thinking there was one additional for, maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I know whenever we'd have the like SLD, if we suspected SLD, there was another thing that we had to do because just certain pieces had to be in there. And I know we talked about the discrepancy versus the RTI, and we have to decide that beforehand. But there seemed like there was something else I may be thinking of. I don't know. It might come to me.
You brought up another really good point there. You do have to, if your policies and procedures allow you to make a choice, once you choose one way of doing it, if you're doing RTI, you can't change in the middle of the string.
No.
So
yeah, that's tricky.
You decide that in your referral meeting, and so that's a very, very good point. And then it's perfectly a good best practice. If you're suspecting that the child is LD and let's say reading, math, and written expression, to have a behavior observation in each of those.
It seems like there was something. Maybe it is the I'm thinking of the motor screening and the initial just kind of gathering all the data. The motor screening seems like it has to be that has to be addressed. I'm guessing because of the nature of SLD. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that because if there's something else that's causing the problem, then that would exclude them from SLD.
Right, right. And I know with our the students that are truly SLD, you see the high IQ and you see this low performance in one area or more. And we had one student in particular I can remember who was super smart, just so bright in every way. But when it came to writing or reading the text in front of him, he could not do it. But man, was he good in the other areas. And so when you say discrepancy, I think before coming into this job, I would wonder what discrepancy are they referring to? But that's it's the performance level versus what he's actually capable of doing.
Exactly.
The IQ versus the performance. But that was something that you pick up as you go. But that was, so I wanted to clarify that if somebody else maybe had the same, question about what that is.
If you look at that full scale IQ scores, let's say you got a child that's got a 101 full scale IQ. Sometimes that's a typical score. We start looking at those scores academically in reading, math, and written expression. And if they're in the high 70s or low 80s, they're going to be in that ballpark. And it depends on their age with the discrepancy. So you have to go through that process, and usually someone like a director or a experienced teacher go through that discrepancy table, and there's a table that you fill out that answers that question. Your criterion score has to be either equal to or below in order to qualify on those tables.
Those in that SLD handbook or guidance document, there's a link that takes the reference table.
I maybe can pull that up for them, Verona.
Tell you this, the SLD guidance document is a really good document. It's really thick, but if you're trying to get it right, it's a really good piece of information to have at your fingertips.
I'm going to pull that up. Here is the on KDE's website, and I've got it on my screen. I've just typed in SLD eligibility guidance, and I'm going to click on that, and then here's that. We'll take a look at that a second just to say it to download, but I'll show everybody so you know how to access that and what that looks like. Okay, so here is, let me try to get it on my screen, full screen. Here is what that SLD eligibility guidance document looks like. And so it'll give you some very specific information for SLD. Okay, so anyway, so I'm just going to kind of scroll through that, but here's the table of contents. And here's that, when we're talking about that discussion about method A or method B, and here's some more information about that discussion if you want to look at that further. So all of those extra resources, great resource to have when you're looking at a student with that has a SLD, you think is eligible for SLD. Let me see if I can get back off this page. And okay, just a sec. So is there anything else you wanted to talk about with eligibility for SLD?
The other forms for documentation that from that list that Dion had pulled up there on the right.
Here it is.
Those eligibility forms are not near as involved as the SLD one. So if you can do the SLD one, you can do the rest of them. The IEP guidance document is also a good place to look if you have, like with you doing hearing impairment, there's a lot of good guiding questions in the IEP guidance document about hearing impairment, and there's an expanded core curriculum that you can access. I'm sure you know about that already. And
Yeah.
Those are good pieces of documentation to have to help build your present level. And then if it can also help aid in whether or not the child's eligible or not.
Yeah, Heather Hall has really helped me, get everything organized and do, use what I need to use. And so like even today, I was using the SPICE, we have a SPICE kit, and this curriculum that we use. And so, and one thing I learned today, actually, while we were talking about MMD and just other categories, I did not know that when a child's tested for MMD, if he or she is suspected to be hearing impaired as well, the psychologist's test that they do, in this case was the Wisc 5, there are separate areas for that child. And so if they group all those scores together, it comes back as the child has this low IQ, which I know this child didn't. And so I can remember, explaining to my director and other people involved that, this child's not MMD, she's hearing impaired. But up until today, I didn't know why. And she explained that because a portion of that test is, it's mostly verbal, that the verbal scores are going to be considerably lower because of her impairment. So it made her look like she had this like 72 IQ when really she's probably a strong average, probably 85, 90, if not higher. And she said that's something that, that's why, is because they group those scores together. And had we looked at the separate, just I think she called it the processing part, and it wasn't the processing speed. There was another component of it. But because they grouped it together, it made it lower. And she said she was curious to see what it would have been had you not combined those scores. But I thought that was interesting because I knew this child was not MMD.
There is a nonverbal IQ test that you can
Yeah.
give. So that's certainly something to think about with your impaired kids.
Yeah, that may be a good idea.
And that auditory processing, piece.
But how easy would it have been to mislabel her,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said, how easy would it have been to mislabel this child?
Yeah.
You get these scores back and you just think, yeah, but that's not always what they, that's really not always the case.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that working with eligibility as a former director, one of the things I always tried to get across to everyone in the room is that we're not here to keep anyone from getting it. Let's not start with that. Okay, let's start with, we've got well-developed RTI over here, covering every student in this school. And if they do not meet eligibility for special education services, all is not lost because we still have Tier 3 RTI. And just because a kid's eligible in one area does not mean that they're not still getting RTI in other areas. They could be low in some areas surrounding that due to reading difficulty and still need RTI. And I think one of the fundamental things that we have to get away from is using RTI as a vehicle to just get kids into special education. And think about that RTI is ongoing, it's 24/7, it's 365. It covers, it's all encompassing. And we're all responsible for it, not just more special, but everybody's responsible for it. And so just because the child becomes eligible does not mean they automatically stop receiving RTI services and everything.
Right, because RTI should be ongoing, right? That was my like when we were talking about SLD, that's what kind of hit. Whenever you have to think about deciding method A or method B, in my opinion, you're doing both anyway. I mean, if you're going to get a psychological test or cognitive test done, then you're going to be doing RTI anyways through the process. So it's kind of like you're using both.
I think what a lot of people wanted to do was to say, okay, if the kid didn't meet the discrepancy because they had a bad day on a test, still use the other. But the law doesn't allow for us to do that.
Right.
You got to choose one or the other and go with it. But we don't want to leave kids out no matter what. We want to make sure that we're catching everybody that needs to be taught, that people are getting what they need yet in order to have them progress in the curriculum. It's like somebody's running some papers.
Yeah, no, I keep, yeah. We may have this little something running in the background or something, I guess.
Can't hear you, Bronna.
What? I don't understand what the.
Oh, there we go.
I can hear you now. Okay.
There's some real background
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from.
white noise. That's my drony voice.
No, it's like a copier or something.
Yeah.
What it sounds like? Sounds like somebody running papers off.
So,
Do you have questions? Do you have, Autumn, do you have, or anybody else on the panel have questions concerning eligibility in any way, or is there or anything? Now's the time to throw it out there and see if we can come up with something. If we can't, we'll find an answer maybe.
and you can look at, we can look at any of the eligibility categories over here on the right. If anybody wants a specific, to ask a specific question, we can look at that.
I'm assuming, Paul, you want to get your eligibility correct. You want to get all the information that you can. You don't want to mess up the match and really be a bear.
Yeah, that's a good point, Veronica. You do. You want to make a correct determination of eligibility. Absolutely.
I always took it as a director. I took it very serious in terms of the labeling process, and wanted to make sure that we were doing it by the law and that we were not leaving any stone unturned when it came to determining. And you know, I got into a situation where, you know, I would try to help these kids qualify if I felt like, you know, they needed it. And that's really frowned upon sometimes. So you have to be careful with that, and just, you know, go with the ARC decision, because that does give you some comfort that you have other people that weigh into the decision. It's not one person making the decision. And but with I think with these eligibilities, lots of times they're not real clear cut, and that's what makes it so difficult. And we have an obligation professionally to try to get it right, and not just flippantly do it. And not saying anybody would do that, but we certainly, you know, ethically, we want to get it right when it comes to eligibility, because we don't want to label a child with a disability if they don't in fact have one.
With a real strong referral, that will help you. You know,
Yes.
The chairperson looking at referral, they got to make sure that everything's there. If you got a really strong referral checklist, and I think you have one, don't you, Dion? Just make sure that that's all covered. If it's not, then he doesn't need to, or he or she doesn't need to accept that referral.
Absolutely.
You know.
That's right. And that we don't buy, that's right. We don't miss any of those pieces before we move on into that, right? Because it is helpful. Make sure you have all of those, you've collected all the data before you move forward.
There was a question that came up the other day when we had our wonderful day there Tuesday with all the new people in, and I want to just bring this up really quick as I think about reevaluation, because it's up there on the top: child find, evaluation, and reevaluation. So every 36 months, a child has to be reevaluated. Okay, so every 3 years. So you look at the date that eligibility was last determined. Autumn, this might be important for you. Take the date that it was last determined, and then you go 36 months into the future, and that's when the child is due for reevaluation. And so you have to have the reevaluation conducted by that 3-year window. Okay. Now, the other question that came up, is there a 60-day timeline with a reevaluation? And the answer is definitively no, there is not. There is not a 60-day timeline on that. You have to have it done within the 36 months. So some people asked that question the other day, and they get confused by that. The 60-day timeline is for initial eligibility. And then once they're in the program, every 36 months is the requirement.
then you've got to watch those kids that turn 9 years old if they're in developmental delay.
Yes.
They're eligible. You know, you've got to watch.
Yeah.
To get that before they turn
Yes,
9.
you have to have a meeting by the time they're 9 to determine if they have a further disability or if they've made the progress that they needed and they no longer present as a child with a disability. That's a good point. I'd forgotten about that, DD.
Yeah, that's what I did when I first started. So I learned real quick, DD turning 9. You can look at your caseload and get your idea, and then you go back and say, wait a minute, these kids are turning 9. That changes everything.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
And then there's kids that you get, you know, you test and then you don't place. And the situations come up before with us, like, how long can you wait before they try that again? And I was told it was 1 year. Is that right in that particular category?
That's what we always did. It had to be at least. And another question was always, do we put them back in RTI? Go back to RTI. I think we can. You know, I don't know what your policy is, you know, but I think that would be a good thing to do. You know, because in tier 3, they're getting good services. You know.
That's a good point, Brona.
What's a Denny? But yeah, now I have to week at least of small group and one-to-one instruction. You have some really good RTI. You might on a lot of the eligibility identification.
So the next thing we were just talked about eligibility, and so anytime you have you're looking at eligibility or you're trying to decide, you know, what you suspect a disability, you can use those eligibility forms. You can access them there and just take a look at them, and then you can get a better understanding so that you know when you're planning for that evaluation that you might have a good plan. So you know based on what that criteria is. So anyway, you can access those forms at any time, and I think that's very helpful to know where you can go and to just take a look at those forms, and especially that SLD guidance. A real good document to have. So the next thing we had planned to talk about on our agenda today was just talking about triangulating data. And I think, does anybody have anything else they want to talk about that? You know, we just talked about using those data sources, but does anybody got any questions about that? So the final thing we wanted to have a brief discussion about today is just developing a present level. And so I know Denny Paul's been doing a lot of work, and I'm sure Brona can speak about this too, but we could just spend the next 5 minutes talking about, you know, developing that present level.
Brona, you want to go first? You want me to, or what?
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. So
look at my guide.
In your guidance document, in your IEP guidance document, starting on page 9, there is some clear-cut commands, I guess, if you will, or pieces that have to be there. So when you're thinking about, the one thing to think about is there's a box to check in each of those present level areas. It starts with communication up there at the top, and then the next one down is academic performance. If you check the box as commensurate, you're not required to put any other information in there. However, you can check that box as commensurate and still put supporting evidence in there. Okay. Now, if you don't check the box, let's say you don't check it for academic performance, but I'll definitely have some academic deficiencies, then you're required to have certain things in that present level. One of the things is strengths on the skills. Okay, so the child, what does the child do well around these skills that we're talking about they're deficient in? So a child could have some strong basic reading skills, but still be deficient in reading comprehension. So a strength would be that they have strong phonemic awareness. They have strong ability to call words and letters, or to make sounds blend into words. Those types of things. And I'm not a reading teacher, but it's certainly that's what we're talking about when we talk about student strengths. We're talking about around skills. We're not talking about some just extraneous strengths, like the child's got good hair, that type of thing. It has to be around the skill. You know what I'm saying? And so that's one clear requirement that has to be in the ones that you do not check the boxes commensurate. Let me give you an example. If you look beyond that at the health, vision, hearing, and motor ability section, lots of times a child will be maybe ADHD and need to take some medicine, but they won't necessarily have, or maybe they need glasses. You can still put that information in there and go ahead and check that area as commensurate, and then work on the other areas. And the areas that are not commensurate, you would have to have all of the 4 things or 5 things that are required. So the first one's strengths, and then you have the needs around the skill deficiencies. That would be the second one. That would be required. So you would identify something like, okay, you've worked with all this information in the triangulation. Now you're funneling down and you're pulling from all the information that you have data on, and you're deciding, hey, these are the things that the child has difficulty with. Reading comprehension's a problem. Math computation's a problem. Okay, so once you identify those as needs, you would need to come up with a baseline for those skills. Okay, and one of the things I see us doing at the region right now is we're forgetting that we have to develop a baseline around those skills. Even if we get good data that tells us the STAR test said this, the RTI says this, we still have to determine with 4 to 6 data points what the baseline is. Okay? And it's a little different for an initial one. We've kind of pushed that, but I think we've created maybe a misnomer in terms of what baseline actually is. So we want to make sure that the baseline is well developed around the skill, so that we can then go to the annual review section and write a measurable goal based on what we've said. Now, so now we're talking about 3 things that have to be in the present level: strengths, needs around the skills, and then the baseline. Okay. Now, this little graphic organizer right here that has vague phrases and specific phrases kind of gives you an idea about how you can make some of those phrases in your present levels measurable, so that you can bounce off of that and you can go right to the annual review goal section, and you can say, hey, I can write a goal from this. Look at the one on the left under the first one. Is active and doesn't pay attention. Can you write a measurable goal from that? You have to ask yourself the question. When I write these statements, can I write a measurable goal? And if I can't, then I have to write it in such a way that I can. So then the second one says they changed it a little bit. They thought about it. They added the data piece. This child attends for 1 to 2 minutes in a large group during a 20-minute observation period or a 10-minute observation period. So when you start putting those numbers with it, then it becomes a little more definitive and a little more descriptive of what actually is the problem with the kid. So then you can write a goal that can be measured. Does that make sense? And then the last piece, then, and I know we're running short on time, the last piece is that we have to have an adverse effect statement. And those adverse effect statements have to cite the grade level performance. What does grade level performance look like in reading for a 3rd grader? And then you say, okay, this is what it looks like, but this is where my child is here that we're working with. And that's how far behind they are. So we've got to cite that grade level around that skill, what that skill looks like. To that performance level in relationship to similar age peers. What does it look like? And how far is the gap? And it's our job to write a goal that's going to approximate how much we can get done in a year, taking into account their pace, their rate of learning, their ability, their disability, and how difficult it is to get it done in 365 days, and then write a measurable goal that's going to get them a little closer to commensurate grade level performance. So that's what we look for when you have an area that you have not checked it as commensurate, And there are some clear-cut difficulties with that. You have to have those pieces in there. The other piece that you might put along with that in the present level would be supporting test scores, would be a fifth one. They don't talk a lot about that, but adverse effect is certainly the fourth and final one. And then you could put some test scores in there, like you know, it's okay to reference like the white score or the star score, but those are not baseline scores. You got to keep that. So if you don't have baseline, you have to develop it yourself around the skills that have been identified through that funneling process. Okay? It's 4:31.
It is. It is. Thank you, Danny and Brona and everybody that's participated today. So we'll resume our next Zoom meeting. Will be the second Wednesday of the month. So that looks like our next meeting will be on October 9th from 3:30 to 4:30. And our next topic is going to just be talking about IEPs, just developing IEPs and talking about how we use the Kentucky Academic Standards when we're goal writing and developing IEP. So that's our primary topic next time. If you guys think of something else you want to have conversations about, we just kind of put together that structure. But if you guys will send me an email and have something that you really want to talk about with folks all around the region as we join this Zoom meeting, you guys send me an email and we'll certainly add that to our agenda. And if you think of something along the way, we'll share it with others. So we're getting our network established, and thank you for your participation. Does anybody else have anything they want to?
I was just going to say, you know, during this, if they have their SLD document on their IEP guidance document and their IEP lesson plan handbook, those are things that you need when you're, you know, just start using those, because they will be your guide to everything and they can answer questions. And then you can go to the website and get all your documents and explanations, and they can always call you guys.
Yep, that's a good point. That's right. So yeah, those are things you just want to have in your hand all the time. You want your IEP guidance, you want your, we call it the schoolhouse document, but also have the SLD eligibility. It's just good to have those printed off. So when I went on KDE's website, you could see just up in the corner, I just typed in what I was looking for and it'd bring me to that, and you just have those, they're active links to take you right to those documents. And that way you have just review them.
Policy letters on there, you know, in the document also. So.
Yep. So
I also want to put a plug in for a series that Brenda Combs and I have started around the IEP development, and we're going to make those available each couple of weeks on the Holler. So if you go to the Holler, there are some videos that are available around this topic that we talked about today, which was present level. And we put together about a 30-minute video on that, so you can always go back and listen to that discussion, and hopefully there'll be some support for you if you're having problems with that. I think our next one's going to be on goal writing, so it should be really good.
Anybody have any questions, comments, anything else? Good. Okay, so we'll come back together next month, October 9th. We'll see everybody back here at 3:30. Thank you.